And yet when I look over there at what the British people, some of them are trying to do, I refuse to judge them for doing whatever it is that they feel they have to do as their homeland, their ancient homeland is being taken from them. Because that is not something that can be walked back. That is permanent. That is something that ends your existence as a people. Like, unless you're going to be like the Jews and, go off into exile and sort of manage to maintain yourself, and even the Jews, they understood that they needed a little spot somewhere on earth that was their special place to develop their culture and to work out their history among themselves as a community of people. And the English people are having that taken from them. The Irish people, Ireland is on track to be minority Irish by like 2070. And you say, well, okay, hang on. Like, A, they never colonized anybody. B, they were colonized and like got the really nasty end of that a lot of the time. Suffered a lot. They fought for hundreds of years against brutal British attempts to try to bring them into the British fold and squash that uniqueness, that they had out there. The British couldn't do it. And the British for a while there could do damn near anything.
Yeah.
Okay. And
they spent a lot of time trying to oppress Ireland, a lot.
Yeah. And it was not only that, it was a chief priority for a long time.
Yeah, bring it to heel.
And we have a bit of a skewed view of the British Empire just because, and there are a lot of things that are glorious and wonderful about the British Empire, but the United States, like, we don't quite understand like the way how bad it was to fall on the wrong side of the empire, because they really treated us with kid gloves during the Revolution. That we had half a parliament that were on our side.
What they did to the Boers.
Yeah, exactly. That's what, they could have done to us.
They created the concentration camp.
Yes. Yeah. And they ran a lot of them during World War II, actually. That's another thing that's actually pretty awful is, as soon as the war broke out, Churchill had all of the German and Italian nationals in Great Britain all rounded up and thrown into concentration camps where they would stay to the end of the war. And this is 1939. And a huge number of those people were Jewish refugees who had come over from Germany to England. And they were just rounded up and thrown in camps for 6 years.
Well, he also had the opposition party thrown in prison for the duration. Oswald Mosley and his wife, right after giving birth, spent the duration. People died. That doesn't look like democracy to me.
Are you saying that Zelensky is not running a democracy?
I'm saying if you don't have elections and you're throwing priests in jail, if you're murdering people who disagree with you as he has, you call whatever. That's like basically a pretty constant form of government throughout history. Yeah. It's fine. I mean, that's like less barbaric than most forms of government actually through history. It's not democracy. Yeah. So please don't lecture me anymore about that.
Well, I mean, we've seen this in the United States, even obviously a much smaller scale crisis. Although maybe not, maybe it is an existential crisis for the people who are making the decisions. But ever since 2016, where democracy is great, we love democracy, but that's for normal times. It's not for World War II.
Right.
It's not for when we've got insurrections going on. And sometimes, you've got to take extraordinary measures that may not be democratic, but it's to preserve democracy. It's always the excuse, right? It's the excuse of every.
Always. It was Lincoln's excuse. Yeah. Exactly. But can I just ask, what's happened to the UK and Ireland is not accidental. Is there any evidence that the people of those countries whose ancestors have lived there for thousands of years, or the indigenous peoples of those countries, that they wanted this? They wanted to be...
I mean, certainly not the majority of the people who live there, right? Obviously. Like, you can go to any Western country, the most just, degraded, cucked country you can possibly find in the West, and the majority of people there don't want any of that happening to them. This is something that has a class element to it. It has, as these countries have become more multi-ethnic and multicultural, it has ethnic, elements to it. It's like there's a lot of things that create a sort of a class of people, and it's a class of people who have most of the influence and power who actually do want these things because they don't identify with the people who are against it on the ground. And this is something that if you see in we've seen in the United States and the West in general, that was budding already. I mean, I would say personally, it goes all the way back to the foundation, but like definitely you see in like the 1960s, if you think of somebody like John Lindsay, right? John Lindsay was the mayor of New York for a while, and he was sort of the quintessential. He didn't grow up like super rich, old money.
He was the last WASP mayor of New
but
York.
he was like that. He was the WASP, right? He was the guy who limousine liberal, the term was invented for, right?
The chin. Yeah.
And if you look at the way he conceived of himself and the way that he, in his class, the people who supported him, the Eastern establishment types and people like him, where they sort of drew their own sense of self-worth and their collective identity was first, we're better than those white people in the South who are protesting Martin Luther King and so forth. We're better than them.
Or the parents in South Boston who don't want busing for their own children.
But then, right. So after the civil rights movement kind of came to a conclusion in 1965, and the Great Migration was starting to create a lot of conflict in the northern cities like New York, that idea, the Southerners are always they're always there as a foil for northern and western elite, identity construction, but it shifted to these ethnic groups that lived in the cities, the Jews, which sounds strange today that like a WASP mayor who's publicly obsessed with social justice would be against the Jews in a conflict, but he was at the time. And it was because, all these people, the Irish and the Italians, these people who think that like that's their neighborhood because it's been their neighborhood for 100 years now. And, it's everybody in the neighborhood goes to a parish church that they've gone to, their grandparents went to. They have internal social structures and dispute arbitration structures and all of these sort of organic institutions that grew up from ground level that gave them an ability to self-govern in a way that made it so they really were not as dependent on the state bureaucracy to do these things for them, right? They could do a lot for themselves. And these are the people who were resisting, the movement of African Americans into their communities. When people look back, for example, like when Martin Luther King went up to Chicago in 1966 and there was the Marquette Park riot, to this day, you have to go into a pretty deep, serious history book about that period to get the fact that everybody sees that as a bunch of white people who came out to protest a bunch of black people moving or trying to open up their neighborhood. But that wasn't a bunch of white people. Those were Lithuanian people. That was a Lithuanian neighborhood that had been a Lithuanian neighborhood for some time. These were a bunch of people who had come over here as refugees and had set up a little community for themselves that they didn't want changed. When that's a Latino community with a bunch of white art students moving into it and gentrifying it in Brooklyn or Los Angeles, people don't have a problem saying that they have a right to maintain this community that they've built for themselves. And I actually kind of agree with that. When I see gentrification happening, it's like, I'm sympathetic at the very least.
Very sympathetic. Yes. The crime thing makes me look, I'm against crime. I'm against hurting people, strangers. But the idea that people of all backgrounds, races, everybody, every human being has a right to have a cohesive social network around him and live the way he basically wants to without bothering others and shouldn't be subject to, abstract social planning that takes no account of human beings. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm on this. Yeah, I agree.
There's this very interesting, well, actually, you know what? That'll take me off on a whole other tangent. I want to stick on the topic you were talking about. You bring up what's happening in England and Ireland. And I think it's hard for a lot of Americans to really understand the tragedy of what's happening over there for the simple reason that, and I'm not trying to trivialize our struggles with similar issues here in the United States. I just say that they're different. That, in the United States, we've essentially had unending demographic turmoil from the very beginning. We fought our revolution, and within a generation, most of the major cities on the East Coast were all majority Irish. And this was at a time when English and Irish, WASP and Irish was these were foreign peoples to each other, Catholic and Protestant.
That was still unresolved when I was small.
There you go.
I mean, it went on a while.
And so within a generation, of the revolution, most of the cities on the East Coast are majority Irish, or at least huge chunks of them are super majority Irish, even if the whole city's not quite. Not to mention there's a lot of Germans, although they assimilated to the WASP majority pretty quickly. But then within a generation of that, just as the Irish are kind of starting to move out of the slums a little bit and become middle-class kind of members of the society, you start getting a ton of Italians, a ton of Jews, a ton of all the Southern and Eastern Europeans who start coming in. And you see a repeat of the same process, a lot of the same problems. The institutions all start to break down. The schools break down. The infrastructure breaks down. And they blame the people coming in because
actually, you get a lot of violence and revolutionary movements.
A lot of violence, organized crime, revolutionary movements, all those things. I mean, people forget that, a lot of the lynching victims in the late early 1900s were Italians. There's a famous one in New Orleans, but there are a lot of famous ones. And so that happens. And then we cut off foreign immigration in 1924. But then we start the Great Migration of African Americans out of the South. You have the Okie migration out west from the Dust Bowl. You have the big hillbilly migrations out of Appalachia up to Detroit and Chicago, Ohio, those places. And so we're just used to the fact that we're always renegotiating our identity here. We were this former British colonies that just fought for our independence, but now we've got to figure out how to construct a collective identity that includes all these Irish people that came in. And one of the ways that we've done that traditionally has been through war. The fact that there were so many Irishmen who came into the country and fought on the side of the Union in the Civil War. Right. If you look at World War II if you think about the city of Vicksburg, which didn't celebrate the 4th of July after it was conquered during the Civil War, stopped celebrating the 4th of July. And I remember I was watching the Ken Burns documentary about the Civil War. He mentioned this and he said, they didn't celebrate the 4th of July again for X number of years. And it's not off the top of my head because I don't remember exactly what year they were. It was 63? Vicksburg. Anyway, he said for X number of years, and I thought about it for a second. I was like, oh, that was July 4th, 1944. That was a month after D-Day. And that's what got this place that was extremely bitter over all this, to raise the flag and celebrate the 4th of July again. So we've used warfare.
So 80 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've used warfare for that purpose. And that's not an uncommon thing, but it's one of the means that we've done to unify our people. And as